This is the bar, the front bar I drilled the holes in for that roller fair lead to bolt onto. And of course we got to have a hole for the cable to go through. The cable hole, I don't think it really needs to be machined or anything. You're not really going to see it. The way I'm thinking I'm going to do it is to burn a big hole with a torch right there, and then burn a hole pretty big right there, same thing as this one, and then I'll make a cut from there to there and from there to there, and then that piece will be cut out. This is one of the burning jigs I carry around and use. Hard to tell how many decades I've been packing that one around. I chose this this size hole, and you might have heard me say before, whenever I follow around the inside of a burning jig like this with my torch, I generally end up getting a hole that's about 1/4 inch smaller than what the opening is in the little jig that I'm using. On this one, I just put this edge of the jig flush with the hole, and eyeballed it up where I marked for. When I had that on there, I made this rectangular shaped mark, and just tried to center that up on it, and figure I'm going to burn that right there. And I took my combination square, and I got an idea of how far the edge of that was from the edge of the plate, and then I just came up here and made a quick mark here. So what that's going to do, just for the sake of consistency, when I get this hole burned, I'm going to take this thing and put it here. I'm going to put this edge with the flush with the edge of the hole, and I'm going to put this edge flush with that mark. Then I can burn my other one. So let's see how that works. A grinder will fix it. Got kind of lucky in one thing here. The way I originally laid this out, whenever I center punched for the winch bolts, it was the winch was a little bit closer to one side than the other. And I saw later how if I did that and I put my 3/4 plate at the front, it would be flush like this. And that's how I wanted to do it. And I thought it was pretty, I liked it that the winch would be against the plate. But there was an issue, because if the winch is against the plate like that, you don't have room for the bolt that holds that roller fair lead. There's not room for the bolt head in there. And that could have been a reducinator if this didn't work out. In this case, I had more space on the other side, and all I had to do was put the winch on, bolt the winch on the other way, and we've got plenty of room, and we're flush at the front, and it's all good. I got the bolts in there. And another thing I'm going to have to remember, since this is like that, that roller fair lead would be a lot easier to bolt on there if you put it on there before you put the winch on. So we'll try to remember that. And I consider myself lucky, because if I had not had a little more space on the other side, I would have had a problem there, and I'd have had to do something different. But it's going to be good. Just flipped her around 180 and on we go. I put this together. I got a tack on each end of this plate, and the way I went about doing that, I got some 1/8 inch welding rods and stuck in there on each side, and that's what I used to give me a gap. I want a gap to weld in there, and so that's how I did that. When you space stuff with welding rods, it works good. Sometimes they come right out. Sometimes you have trouble. If you got one of these welding wedges, if you put this in right beside your welding rod and tap it a few times, it can usually give you enough space to get the rod out. And this is going to come out easier than a welding rod. Obviously, I'm using an 1/8 inch welding rod, consistent 1/8 inch gap on each side. I'm not using a wedge, because that's going to change depending on how much. But the wedge, when you stick it in there and you go to get it out, it's going to come out a lot easier because of its shape, you know, down to a point. But all right, well, we'll see about putting the side brackets on and keep going. Looks like I can take this back apart and weld it. Just like brand new. Used the 1/4-inch jet rods to weld this up, and I was really just using that big of a rod to get the reach, to try to reach as far as I could without having a rod change. And obviously at 34 inches I couldn't do it in one rod. I made it halfway, so I decided to make my rod change in the center. When I realized there was no way that one rod was going to do the whole thing, on the first rod I ran, I came here to a little past the center and stopped. Then I got another rod and I ran from here to there. And for whatever reason, I was just wanting to make it so that I stopped in the center. And you can see right here now there's plenty of overlap with this weld, but that right there is one of the defects that it's pretty common to get with jet rod. It's just such a big hot puddle. I think I'm on about 260 amps here. When you pull it out, sometimes you'll get that little bit of porosity, so I'm going to tune on that a little bit. Got the primer on this thing. Something I didn't mention before, I fabricated, sorry, my heater's loud. I fabricated a couple parts right here to hold this switch, so that's where that emergency switch will go. We're going to be painting this black, and so I want to see what needs to be done next to make that happen. Alright, y'all, I want to try and get you updateified here, because current operations are as normal. Tools and materials are being used in ways for which they were never intended. I did some paint testing over here on some scrap. And what this paint test is, I stuck my finger in it a few times. What this paint test is I like to use Rust-Oleum paint. It doesn't dry as fast as high quality paint, and it doesn't get as hard. I like to use Speedo Coat Clear Coat. I've used Speedo Coat Clear Coat, this type right here, and I've also used the one that they have for aluminum. They have one dedicated for aluminum, and they both work great. I really like it. I got the bright idea, as much as I like that clear, and as fast as it dries, and as hard as it gets, and as impressed as I am, could I color that clear with some black and make my own high quality paint? Well, that's what I did over there, and I'm pretty tickled with the result. I have one part Speedo Clear, one part activator for that clear, and one part Rust-Oleum gloss black, and I sprayed that over there and it worked. So that's how I'm going to try and paint this winch bracket. And what I did here is something I've done before. I save a lot of plastic containers, and it kind of annoys my wife because I have literally have garbage cans, huge garbage, 50 gallon garbage cans full of plastic containers. But once I get into doing certain projects, sometimes I'll use all of them. I go right through them. Sometimes they build up, but I save. This is like my wife uses those like a Lysol disinfectant wipe when she's fostering animals a lot and stuff. She uses different kinds of things like that. We get a bunch of these. I'm not going to go to Lowe's and buy a paint container. I save these things. And one of the things I do, if you see these marks, now I've already said I'm going to use one part this, one part that, one part that. Well, the way I'm going to measure it, welding shop style, I guess, I took this thing, I said, well, I want about 3 inches of it. And I put my tape measure on the bottom and I marked 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch. And when I mix this stuff, I'm going to pour it, one of them up to here, then pour it to there, then pour it to there. That's how I'm going to do it. So that's that. Over here, put primer on this last night. It had all night to dry. And I've scuffed it with a piece of 220 grit sandpaper. I just went around and scuffed the flats. I don't know how much that's going to help. It usually smooths things out a little bit, and it scratches the surface to make it a little better adhesion. I don't know how, you know, depending on what kind of paint jobs you're into, if you spray paint, it doesn't matter really whether you're spraying it with an air gun or a can, rattle cans, however you do it. I'm just going to mention something. I was talking to my cousin about it. My cousin's painted a lot of stuff recently within the last couple of years. And he's painted a lot of stuff with rattle cans. And he even painted a truck with a Wagner electric sprayer, he was telling me. But he was telling me one of the things that somebody told him that really helped him was about putting a light coat on and then letting it tack up and spray, and then spraying over that. That right there, I kind of wish I had told him that a lot sooner, and that's why I'm mentioning it right now. That's one of the keys to getting your paint to stick on there and not run. Your first coat of paint on anything should be pretty light, and you don't want to try and cover a whole lot with a first coat. But once you put that first coat on with this oil-based paint of any kind, and you give it some time, what you're doing is you're letting it tack up and you're letting it get sticky, so that when you apply quite a bit of paint onto it to get it to be glossy, it's kind of like you're spraying your paint on there over top of some glue, some tacky, sticky glue. And so that's what's going to allow you to put quite a bit on there and not have an issue. And if you see, I use these hoists. I can't imagine being in a shop without these hoists after learning how great they are. This is another thing where, you know, I can paint this some like I do, and then I can take one up and one down and turn the angle of this and make it easier to see and try to, you know, help me to make it easier to reach and try not to miss spots and whatnot. So you can see I've got this thing hung up with some tie wire, and I'm gonna get the paint mixed up and get the painting, and we'll see how this works out. From what I'm seeing, that worked. There's a little rough spot right there. I don't know what happened, but you know, this is NBS welding, not NBS painting. When I start a business called NBS painting, then we'll get more critical on that. I think it's good enough. Good enough painting for a welder. We'll see how that does. You know what? It's like, it's almost like watching paint dry.